My wife looked me dead in the eye at the resort check-in desk in Sedona, Arizona, and said, "We didn't reserve a room for you, Maxwell." Not, "There was a mix-up." Not, "I'm so sorry, let me fix this." Just a flat, unapologetic statement, delivered in front of 6 of her friends, like I was a stranger who had wandered in off the desert highway asking for directions. And when her friends started laughing, actually laughing, one of them leaned over to another and said it loud enough for me to hear, "We only reserved rooms for the important people. The elites. Not everyone makes the cut." I stood there at that marble check-in counter in the lobby of the Enchantment Resort, surrounded by red rock canyon walls and a sky that had turned the color of blood orange at sunset, and I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not humiliation. Something colder than both of those things. I looked at Bridget, my wife of 9 years. The woman I had driven 4 hours from Phoenix. The woman whose luggage was already stacked on the bellhop's cart. The woman who had planned this trip down to the last restaurant reservation and apparently decided somewhere along the way that I didn't deserve a place to sleep. I smiled, very quietly, very calmly. "Then I'll leave," I said, and I picked up the one bag I had brought for myself, turned around, and walked straight out through those glass doors, back into the desert evening air. I want you to stay with me through this entire story, because what happened in the hours after I left that resort, after I stopped answering my phone, is something I still have trouble believing myself. But before we get there, I need to go back. Because this moment at the Enchantment Resort didn't come from nowhere. It was the end of something that had been building for years, and if I'm going to tell you the truth, I have to tell you all of it. If this story is already pulling at something in your gut, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel right now, hit the like button, and drop a comment below. Tell me if you've ever had a moment where the person who was supposed to have your back made you feel like a stranger. Your story matters, and this community is where we tell them. My name is Maxwell Garrett. I'm 43 years old. I run a mid-sized accounting firm in Scottsdale, Arizona, that I built from a single-room office with secondhand furniture to a practice with 11 employees and a client list that includes some of the most successful small business owners in the Valley. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that I knew how to work. I knew how to build things. I knew how to be steady and reliable and patient. What I didn't know, and what it took me 9 years to learn, was that some people will take a steady man's patience and mistake it for weakness. I met Bridget Calloway at a rooftop fundraiser for a Phoenix Children's Hospital when we were both 34. She was a marketing director for a luxury real estate firm, and she had one of those presences that fills a room without trying. The kind of woman who always seemed to be laughing at exactly the right moment, always dressed like the event was slightly below her level, always connected to someone important. She was charming in a way that felt genuine. That was the thing. It wasn't performance, at least not at first. She genuinely enjoyed people, enjoyed conversations, enjoyed the way social events could create opportunities. I admired that about her. I was the guy in the corner analyzing the catering budget in my head. She was the one making the room feel like the party had actually started. We dated for 2 years and got married in Tucson on a night in October when the desert air had finally cooled enough to breathe. Her wedding speech included the line, "Maxwell is the person who makes everything make sense." I saved that in my head for a long time, replayed it on hard days. The first 5 years were good. Not perfect, nobody's are, but genuinely good. We bought a house in the Arcadia neighborhood of Phoenix. We traveled. We built a life that from the outside looked like something both of us had worked hard for. But somewhere around year 6, something started shifting. I noticed it the way you notice a slow change in weather. Not a storm, but a pressure drop, a color change on the horizon. Bridget began spending more time with a group of women from her industry. High earners, luxury brand women. Women who could spend $2,000 at dinner without blinking and consider it a reasonable Tuesday. Her closest friend in this group was a woman named Courtney Hale. Courtney was tall, permanently tan, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been told no, in a way that actually stuck. She was divorced, wealthy from a settlement with a venture capital husband, and she had an opinion about everything, including, as I would come to discover, about me. Bridget came home from dinners with Courtney and the group with this new energy. Not the positive kind, the kind that makes a person critical. She started noticing things about our life that she hadn't seemed to notice before. The car I drove, a Lexus, not a Porsche. The neighborhood we lived in, nice, not obscenely nice. The vacations we took, good ones, not private villa, six-figure ones. Courtney and her friends are going to Sedona next spring, she told me one evening in February, not looking up from her phone. The Enchantment Resort. They're renting out a whole block of rooms. Sounds expensive, I said. It is. That's the point. I should have read something into that exchange. I didn't. Months passed. Bridget mentioned the Sedona trip a few more times. I assumed I was going with her. She and I had never taken a trip where we didn't go together. It didn't occur to me that the assumption itself was wrong. About 6 weeks before the trip, I brought it up directly. I was standing in our kitchen making coffee on a Sunday morning, and Bridget was at the table going through her phone, the way she always did on Sunday mornings now, not reading the news, not looking at anything in particular, just staying somewhere else in her head while her body sat at our table. "Have you booked the Sedona hotel yet?" I asked. "We should probably figure out logistics." She looked up, just for a second. "I'll take care of it," she said. "Do you want me to look at flights? Or were you thinking we'd drive?" "I'll take care of it," she said again. Her eyes went back to her phone. I should have pushed. I didn't. I poured my coffee, sat down across from her, and told myself that was a settled conversation. Looking back, I can point to a dozen moments where the truth was visible if I had been willing to see it. The way Bridget would lower her voice when she talked to Courtney on the phone if I was nearby. The way she would describe the trip in terms of the girls, without ever including me in that language. Not when Maxwell and I get to Sedona, but when we get to Sedona, we meaning a group I was apparently not part of. The way she deflected every follow-up question I had about the trip with something vague and confident. A man named Elliot from my office went through something similar 2 years ago. His wife stopped including him in future tense plans gradually enough that he didn't notice the absence until it was a pattern. He told me about it over lunch one afternoon, and I listened politely, and thought to myself, privately, that it sounded like something that wouldn't happen if you were paying attention. I was humbled later to realize I had not been paying attention at all. It wasn't settled. Nothing was taken care of. At least not for me. The Saturday morning we were supposed to leave for Sedona started the way our Saturday mornings had been starting for the past year, with a distance between us that we had both gotten very good at not acknowledging. Bridget was up early, fully made up by 7, her 3 suitcases all ready by the door. 3. For a 4-day trip. I had 1 bag, my gym bag, repurposed, clean clothes, toiletries, my laptop, because I never fully stop working. I'm an accountant. Numbers don't take vacations. "You've got everything?" I asked her. "Of course," she said, already on her phone. The drive up State Route 179 into Sedona took us through some of the most staggering scenery in the state. The red sandstone formations rising out of the earth like something from another planet. The scrub oak and juniper clinging to the canyon walls. The light hitting the rock faces at angles that turned them from red to orange to something that looked almost purple. I pointed things out. She scrolled through Instagram. Courtney and the group were already at the Enchantment Resort when we arrived. 5 women, all of them dressed like the trip had been sponsored by a fashion publication, designer luggage, matching sunglasses. That particular brand of loud laughter that exists only to make people nearby feel excluded. I didn't mind any of that. I've never needed to be included in someone else's scene. I grabbed my bag and walked with Bridget to the front desk. That's when I found out. The woman at the desk had a calm, professional face that didn't change when she said, "I'm sorry, sir. I'm showing a reservation for Ms. Garrett, but there's only 1 name on the booking. We don't have a room registered for you." I looked at Bridget. Bridget looked at me. Something moved across her face. A quick calculation, not guilt exactly. More like the assessment of someone deciding whether they're going to manage a situation or let it play out. She let it play out. "Yeah," she said. "I only booked for myself." The word "only" landed like a stone. Behind us, I heard Courtney say something to one of the other women. I couldn't catch every word, but I caught enough. The phrase, elites. The word, reserved. The laughter. The very specific kind of laughter that is designed not as a reaction to something funny, but as a weapon deployed at someone's expense. One of the women, a redhead named Paige who I'd met exactly once before at Bridget's birthday dinner and found exhausting, actually made eye contact with me when she laughed. That was deliberate. That kind of cruelty always is. I stood there for a moment. The desk clerk was very carefully studying her computer screen. The bellhop behind me had gone completely still. Everyone in the immediate area understood that something was happening. And here is the thing about moments like that. The ones where humiliation is offered to you on a plate and the expectation is that you'll take it. Eat it quietly. Say nothing. Let the laughter wash over you. Absorb it. Become smaller. The expectation was that I would scramble. Ask the desk clerk for solutions. Call other hotels. Apologize somehow for the inconvenience of my own existence. I have done things like that before. I am good at managing other people's chaos. It's part of what makes me good at my job. I can de-escalate. I can find solutions. I can be the calm in the room. But standing in that lobby with my one bag and Bridget's 3 suitcases and 5 women laughing behind me and a marble desk between me and a room that didn't have my name on it, I made a decision. I was done being the solution to other people's problems. "All right," I said to Bridget. My voice was level. "I'll leave you to it. Maxwell." "Have a good trip," I said, and I walked out. The drive back down through Oak Creek Canyon is one of the most beautiful drives in Arizona. Steep canyon walls closing in on either side, the creek running beside the road, the light coming through the trees in long golden columns. I barely saw any of it. My eyes were on the road and my mind was somewhere very quiet, the way a room gets quiet right after something loud has happened. My phone started ringing before I hit the first switchback. Bridget. I let it go to voicemail. Then again. Then a third time. I pulled over at a turnout above the canyon and watched the missed calls accumulate. 5 from Bridget. 2 from an unknown number, probably Courtney, because of course Courtney would insert herself. 1 from a number I recognized as Paige's. The same woman who had laughed to my face. I turned the ringer off, tucked the phone into the glove compartment, pulled back onto the road, and kept driving south toward Phoenix. Here is what I want you to understand about that drive. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't crying. I wasn't running on adrenaline or righteous anger or any of the things you might expect. I was very, very calm. The kind of calm that comes not from peace but from clarity, when you have finally seen something clearly that you had been deliberately not looking at for a long time. I had been telling myself a story about my marriage for years, that Bridget's changes were temporary, that the distance was a phase, that the women she surrounded herself with were influencing her but weren't changing who she fundamentally was, that the woman who said Maxwell is the person who makes everything make sense was still in there somewhere under the designer labels and the social ambition and the growing contempt for everything that didn't meet a certain financial threshold. Somewhere between mile marker 349 and the outskirts of Cottonwood, I stopped telling myself that story. When I got back to Phoenix, I drove straight to my brother's house. Theo Garrett is 2 years older than me, and he runs a landscaping company in Tempe that he built into something genuinely impressive over 15 years of work. He's the kind of man who is always outside, always sunburned, always ready to hand you a beer and say almost nothing helpful in the most helpful possible way. He opened the door, looked at my face, and stepped back to let me in. "Sedona?" he said. "No room," I said. He handed me a beer and sat down across from me at his kitchen table. I told him everything. The check-in desk, the laughter, the word elites. The way Bridget had looked at me during that half second before she decided not to fix it. He listened to all of it without interrupting, which is one of Theo's most valuable qualities as a human being. When I finished, he said, "How long has this been going on?" "The trip?" "Just today." "Not the trip. This." I looked at my beer bottle. 2 years, I said. "Maybe 3. Theo nodded slowly. "And what are you going to do?" I didn't have an answer to that yet, but I was starting to form one. My phone, retrieved from the glove compartment, Had 23 missed calls by the time I got to Theo's house. Bridget. Courtney's number 3 more times. Paige. 2 calls from a number I didn't recognize that turned out, when I finally listened to the voicemails, to be from a woman named Sandra, one of the other group members, who left a surprisingly earnest message saying she thought what happened was wrong, and she wanted me to know that. I noted that, filed it away. The first voicemail from Bridget was confused. Maxwell, where are you? Call me back. The second was slightly more urgent. Maxwell, what are you doing? Call me. The third had an edge to it. This is ridiculous. You're being completely childish. Call me right now. The fourth was something else entirely. She was crying. Not the performative kind. I knew that sound, had heard it deployed in arguments before. This was different. Her voice was broken in a way I hadn't heard since her father's funeral 5 years ago. Maxwell, please call me. Something happened. Please. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. Then I called the front desk of the Enchantment Resort. The woman who answered had the same calm professionalism as the one at check-in. When I identified myself and asked if there had been any incident involving my wife, Bridget Garrett, she paused. The kind of pause that means, yes, something happened, and I'm deciding how much to tell you. Sir, she said carefully, your wife was transported by ambulance approximately 90 minutes ago. She had a medical episode. I believe she was taken to Verde Valley Medical Center in Cottonwood. Verde Valley Medical Center sits just off Main Street in Cottonwood, a small city in the Verde Valley between Sedona and Prescott. I had driven through Cottonwood less than 2 hours earlier on my way back to Phoenix. I was now driving back north at a speed that my lawyer would tell me not to put in writing. Theo was in the passenger seat. He had gotten up from his kitchen table without a word, grabbed his keys out of habit, remembered I was driving, put them back down, and gotten into my car instead. That's a brother. I walked into the emergency department at Verde Valley at 8:47 in the evening. The waiting room had the same fluorescent quiet that all emergency rooms share. The beige walls, the plastic chairs, the mounted TV playing a cable news channel that nobody was watching, the particular smell of antiseptic and concern. Courtney was there. She stood up when she saw me, and for the first time in 2 years of knowing this woman, she didn't look like the top of a social hierarchy. She looked scared. Her mascara had tracked down both cheeks, and she hadn't bothered to fix it, which told me something about how the last 2 hours had actually been. Courtney was a woman who had never, in my experience, allowed herself to look anything other than composed. She was not composed now. Maxwell, she said. Thank God. What happened? I said. She collapsed, Courtney said. We were at dinner at the resort restaurant. She went down. We thought she fainted, but she didn't come back up the way you come back up from fainting. She went gray and she didn't come back. They called 911. I looked around the waiting room. 4 of the 5 women from the trip were there. Paige was sitting in the back corner with her arms crossed over herself like she was cold. Sandra, the one who had left me the earnest voicemail, was standing near the water fountain, and when she saw me, she made a movement with her face that was almost a wince, recognition, relief, something harder to name. The 5th woman wasn't in the waiting room, and I found out later she had already driven back to Phoenix, unable to wait. Has anyone spoken to the doctor? I asked. They came out once, Courtney said. They said she was stable. They wouldn't tell us much because we're not family. No, I said. You're not. Paige looked up when I said that. I wasn't being cold when I said it. It was just the simple fact of the situation. But the weight of it in that moment wasn't lost on anyone in the room. A nurse appeared and led me back through the double doors. Bridget was in a room with white curtains and the quiet hum of medical equipment. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her. Not smaller physically. She was the same height, same person, but diminished in the way people get when their body has just reminded them forcefully who is actually in charge. She turned her head when I came in. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. You came back, she said finally. You called, I said. Her eyes filled. I didn't think you would. I pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down. What did the doctor say? She told me. She had been experiencing what turned out to be an irregular heart rhythm, a condition called atrial fibrillation, which the cardiologist on call would later explain to us had likely been developing for some time without symptoms, until a combination of stress, dehydration from the desert heat, and alcohol at dinner had triggered an acute episode. Frightening, but manageable. She was stable. She would need monitoring, medication, some lifestyle adjustments. She was not in immediate danger, but she had been. For the 20 minutes between collapsing at the restaurant table and arriving at the hospital, she had been genuinely in danger. And the first person Courtney had tried to call, the one person they all knew had to be reached, was me, the husband who didn't have a room, the man they had laughed at 3 hours earlier. We were in that hospital room together for 6 hours. The cardiologist came. The attending physician came. A nurse came in at regular intervals to check her vitals and adjust things I couldn't name. Theo sat in the waiting room and texted me exactly once. I'm here as long as you need. At some point around midnight, the room got quiet enough that Bridget and I had to actually talk to each other. I'm sorry, she said, for today. Today was the visible part, I said. The rest of it has been going on longer. She didn't argue with that, which told me she knew exactly what I meant. Courtney convinced me, she said slowly, that we were in different leagues, you and me, that I had outgrown this, that I needed to be around people who matched where I was going. Where were you going? She looked at the ceiling. I don't know. Somewhere. I didn't even know where. Just somewhere that seemed more impressive. More important. She paused. I told myself you wouldn't care, that you'd understand, that I'd absorb it, I said. Yes. Because I always do. She closed her eyes. Yes. I sat with that for a while. Outside the room, the hospital went about its quiet, serious business of keeping people alive. Maxwell, she said, what happens now? And that is the question, isn't it? The one that doesn't have a quick answer. The one that doesn't get resolved in a single conversation in a hospital room at midnight. I said what was true. I don't know yet. Here is what I can tell you about the weeks that followed, because a story like this doesn't end at midnight in a cardiac ward. Life doesn't work that way. Bridget came home from the hospital with a prescription, a cardiology follow-up appointment, and, for the first time in what I realized had been years, a quietness about her that felt genuine rather than dismissive. Something had shaken loose in the way she looked at things. At me. At herself. Courtney called once, 2 days after we got home. Bridget let it go to voicemail. That was notable. I moved into the guest room, while we figured things out. Not dramatically. Not as punishment. Just practically. Because I needed space to think, and so did she. And an honest separation under the same roof was better than a false closeness that benefited neither of us. I called a therapist. Not a couples therapist yet. First my own. A man named Dr. Harrison, who had an office in downtown Scottsdale with a view of Camelback Mountain, and who had the useful quality of asking excellent questions and then waiting very patiently for real answers rather than comfortable ones. In our third session, he asked me something that I've been thinking about ever since. When did you decide that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth? I didn't have a quick answer. I've been working on that answer for months now. The truth is, I knew. I knew things were wrong before they got to a resort lobby in Sedona. I knew when Bridget started coming home from Courtney's dinners with that new critical energy, and I chose to absorb it rather than address it. I knew when she started describing vacations in terms of the girls, and I told myself the omission was accidental. I knew when she said, I'll take care of the reservation, and I let myself believe it because the alternative, actually asking, actually confirming, actually insisting on clarity, would have required a conversation I was tired of imagining having. I had built my professional life on precision. I checked numbers twice, then a third time. I verified. I confirmed. I did not leave things to assumption. I had not applied a single one of those skills to my marriage. That is one of the most disorienting discoveries a person can make. that the version of yourself that is competent and careful and reliable in one area of life can be completely asleep in another. 3 months after Sedona, Bridget and I sat down with a couples therapist named Dr. Nadia Foster, who had a practice in Scottsdale and had been recommended by 2 separate people I trusted. She had the quality of making both people in the room feel heard without letting either one off the hook, which is genuinely rare and difficult. We talked, more honestly than we had talked in years, about the distance that had grown between us, about Bridget's growing conviction that she needed to be somewhere more glamorous than her actual life, and where that conviction had come from, and what it was trying to solve that she hadn't been able to name. About my habit of absorbing rather than confronting. About the ways we had both participated in building the wall between us, even if we'd used different tools to build it. Dr. Foster asked Bridget, in one session, to describe what she had felt in the 20 minutes between collapsing at the restaurant and arriving at the hospital. Bridget was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I kept thinking about Maxwell. That was the only thing. Not the trip. Not the room. Not Courtney. Just Maxwell. Whether he was coming. Whether I had made it so he wouldn't." She looked at me when she said that last part. The way she looked at me was like finding something she'd put down and forgotten about. I won't tell you that moment fixed everything. It didn't. That's not how fixing things works. But it was the first moment in a long time where I believed there was actually something there to fix. Paige called me 6 weeks after Sedona. She got my number from Bridget. I almost didn't pick up. She said, "I want to apologize for what I did at the resort, the laughing, making eye contact with you. That was deliberate, and it was cruel, and there is no version of it that was okay." I said, "I appreciate that." "I want to explain something," she said. "Not to excuse it, just so you understand how it happened." She paused. Courtney has a way of making everyone around her compete to be the most impressive person in the room. And the easiest way to score points with her is to find someone who isn't impressive and make them smaller. I've done it before. I'm not proud of it. But watching you walk out of that lobby with your one bag and not look back at any of us. She stopped. "What?" I said. "It made me realize something," she said. "About myself. About the game I'd been playing. About what it actually looks like from outside." That was the end of our conversation. I don't know what Paige did with whatever she'd realized, but that call stayed with me. Courtney, for her part, sent Bridget a long text message about 2 months after everything happened. I didn't read it. It wasn't mine to read. But Bridget described it to me later. It was, according to her, an explanation of Courtney's philosophy about life and relationships, and what it meant to be ambitious, and how she had always thought Bridget deserved more than what she had, and that she hoped Bridget would make the choices that reflected who she really was. There was no apology in it anywhere. Bridget didn't respond. She showed me the text once, let me read it, then deleted it. "She genuinely believes she was helping me," Bridget said. "I know," I said. "That's the most frightening part." It is. There is a kind of friendship that masquerades as support, while it systematically teaches you to be dissatisfied with your life. A kind of social circle that presents itself as elevation, while actually training you to be contemptuous. Courtney was very good at that kind of influence. She probably still is. And somewhere there is probably another Bridget who is coming home from dinners with a new critical energy, and a husband who is absorbing it and telling himself it's just a phase. I'm telling you this story from the other side of it. We are still in it. Marriage is not a thing you fix and then put on a shelf. But we are in it differently now. More honest. More uncomfortable in the productive way that honesty creates discomfort. More aware of the things we had both been choosing not to see. The Enchantment Resort, ironically, is a genuinely beautiful place. I've looked at pictures of it since. The red rock formations, the canyon views, the hiking trails winding through the desert at dawn. Someday, I want to actually see it. Go back to Sedona, check in under both our names, and look at the landscape we drove through that evening without either of us really seeing it. But that's the future. What I have right now is the present, which has turned out to be more honest and more complicated and more mine than any version of life I was living before I walked out of that lobby. Here is the thing about the moment when someone tells you there is no room for you. Sometimes it is the beginning of the end of something. And sometimes, not always, not easily, not without a lot of work, it is the moment a different story starts. I walked out of the Enchantment Resort with one bag and a phone that was about to start ringing. I drove south through Oak Creek Canyon while the calls piled up in the glove compartment. I sat at my brother's kitchen table and said out loud the things I had been refusing to say, and then my wife's voicemail broke in the middle of the fourth message, and I drove back north. I want to tell you that I drove back because I was the bigger person, because I had already forgiven her, because love conquers all and the right thing always feels obvious. None of that is true. I drove back because her voice had broken in a way that meant something real was happening, and whatever else was true about our marriage, I was not going to be the person who listened to that and kept driving south. That's the whole story. Messy and unfinished and still in progress, which is the only honest way to tell it. My name is Maxwell Garrett. My wife didn't book me a room. Her friends laughed. I walked out. Hours later, something happened that none of us saw coming, and it changed the angle of everything. I'm still here. We're still here. And if this story made you feel something, if it resonated with you in ways you weren't expecting, I want to know. Drop that in the comments. Tell me your version. Tell me the moment you walked out, or the moment you should have, or the moment someone came back when you didn't expect them to. This channel is where we tell real stories. And the most real stories are the ones that don't wrap up in a bow. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Because sometimes the most important room is the one that has your name on it, even when someone else forgot to book it. Maxwell didn't leave because he was angry. He left because he was done absorbing. And there's a huge difference between those two things. A lot of us stay in situations way longer than we should, not out of love, but out of habit, out of not wanting to make things uncomfortable. We keep being the steady one, the patient one, the one who handles it, and we call that strength. But sometimes, it's just avoidance with a better name. The real moment in this story wasn't the hospital. It was Maxwell standing at that desk, hearing the laughter, and choosing not to shrink. That's the thing nobody talks about, knowing when staying quiet stops being mature and starts being self-betrayal. Have you ever been in a situation where someone treated you like you didn't belong, and you stayed anyway? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this kind of storytelling speaks to you, subscribe. We're just getting started.